Hey guys, tonight we're unbuttoning the itchy truth about ancient fashion choices. Because tonight, we're talking about what Romans really wore. Not the Hollywood version with gleaming armor and pristine white togas gently swaying in the breeze. No, I'm talking about real Roman fashion, sweaty, practical, slightly tragic, and often one laundry crisis away from total collapse. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of historical nonsense. Leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what questionable thing you're wearing right now. Sweatpants for the third day in a row. No judgment. Now dim the lights, turn on that fan for maximum sleep vibe immersion, and snuggle up like a Roman in a communal bathhouse trying not to make eye contact. Have you ever wondered what ancient Romans did when their tunics shrank in the wash? Or if gladiators had wardrobe malfunctions mid-fight? Did Roman senators wear boxers under their togas? Was there a Roman version of Crocs? And what do you do when your wool cloak smells like wet goat and you can't afford soap or dignity? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of linen, leather, and lice. And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 133 CE. You're standing barefoot on cold marble. You're wearing a shapeless tunic. You haven't showered in days. And someone just called you slave under their breath. Good luck. You're dressed. Technically. It's a loose rectangle of itchy linen, vaguely held together with a belt, and your will to live. This is your tunic, your everything. Pajamas, workwear, dinner attire, funeral outfit. It's like the Roman version of a hoodie, except less comfortable and more prone to exposing body parts when the wind gets sassy. And no, you don't get more than one. You have a tunic. Singular. The idea of a wardrobe is laughable. There's no rotating closet filled with options. Just one increasingly crusty garment you've been wearing since the last Saturnalia, which you vaguely remember because your cousin Gaius caught fire trying to jump over a torch while drunk on date wine. The tunic, in theory, is simple. 2 pieces of fabric sewn together at the sides and shoulders, with a hole for your head and 2 smaller holes for your arms. It's the clothing equivalent of a participation trophy, functional, uninspired, and given to absolutely everyone. But the fabric? That's where the suffering begins. If you're poor, and let's face it, your tunic is made of rough, undyed wool or linen. It's the kind of material that manages to be both stiff and limp at the same time. It clings in the wrong places and billows in the others. It's like wearing a grumpy dish towel. The itch is constant. It doesn't matter how often you air it out, translation, hang it on a stick and hope birds don't poop on it. The fibers still feel like they were, harvested from a disgruntled hedgehog. There's no tag that says, machine wash cold. There's no tag at all. Because there's no brand, no label, and certainly no fabric softener. Your tunic is washed maybe once a month if you're lucky by a man named Publius at the local Fullonica who soaks it in vats of human urine. Yes, urine. The ammonia helps bleach and clean the cloth. Or at least that's what people tell themselves while gagging. You'll know your tunic's been washed when it comes back slightly stiffer and somehow even more suspiciously yellow. Color isn't really a thing unless you're rich. Patricians get dyed fabrics, soft lavenders, bold reds, even the sacred and wildly expensive Tyrian purple. You get beige, or dusty beige, or sweaty beige with hints of despair, because dyes cost money, and your job pays in vegetables and back pain. But it's not just about suffering, there's also fashion to consider. The length of your tunic signals your status in Roman society. If you're wearing a tunic that stops just above the knee, you're a working man probably in the fields, hauling amphorae, or trying to ignore your sunburn. A longer tunic that goes down to the ankles? That means you don't do manual labor. You're probably a philosopher or a lawyer or someone who thinks manual labor is a species of slave. Now let's talk belts. Because the only thing standing between your tunic and an unfortunate public scandal is a strip of leather tied around your waist. This belt is doing a lot of work. It cinches the fabric so you don't flash the forum every time you bow. It also holds your coin pouch, your dagger, and maybe the leftover cheese you wrapped in fig leaves last week. It is, without exaggeration, your most useful accessory. But even belts can't prevent the creeping disaster that is Roman wind. One gust, and suddenly your tunic is doing its best impression of a rebellious curtain. If you're wearing a subligaculum underneath a leather loincloth that chafes like betrayal, you'll be embarrassed. If you're not wearing anything, you'll be remembered. Either way, you develop a talent for subtly holding your sides whenever the breeze picks up. Fashion meets survival. If you're a woman, the tunic game is slightly more complicated. You still get the itchy rectangle, but now it comes with layers. A tunica interior, an overdraped stola, and a palla, basically a fashionable blanket you struggle to keep on your shoulders. Pins, brooches, and constant readjustment are your daily routine. And if you're trying to run, good luck. You'll trip over your dignity. Still, in spite of the discomfort, the stink, the scratchiness, and the ever-looming threat of a wardrobe malfunction, your tunic is home. It's what you sleep in, eat in, pray in, argue with your neighbor in. It's the one piece of consistency in a world where roads are paved with lava rocks and public toilets are just long benches of shared trauma. So you adjust the belt, scratch behind your knee where the linen has fused with your leg hair, and sigh. This is your outfit, your life, your tunic. Welcome to Roman fashion. It's not about flair, it's about endurance. Ah, laundry day. In modern times, a button push and some detergent. In Rome, a barefoot walk to the Folonica where slaves stomp on your clothes in vats of human urine. Yes, ammonia-rich pee was the original Tide Pod. And yes, that smell? It stays with you. Forever. You begin the day with a bundle of tunics slung over your shoulder and a growing sense of dread. The bundle's heavy, damp, and starting to heat up in the sun like a burrito filled with disappointment. You're heading toward the local Folonica, the Roman equivalent of a dry cleaner, if the dry cleaner doubled as a chemical weapons lab and smelled like Satan's outhouse. The Folonica is run by Fuller's professional launderers who've completely lost their sense of smell, probably because they've spent decades ankle-deep in communal urine. These aren't quaint little washrooms with rose-scented soap. These are stone vats big enough to drown a gladiator, filled with stale pee collected from amphorae placed around the city. That's right. Romans had public pee pots. You could literally be fined for not donating your golden contribution to the neighborhood cleaning supply. The ammonia in the urine breaks down dirt, grease, and the kind of stains that are better left unexplained. Your tunic is going in grey. It will come out a different kind of grey, technically cleaner, spiritually traumatized. You hand your garments over to a slave whose job it is to take off their sandals, roll up their tunic, and hop into the vat like it's a cursed spa. Then the stomping begins, and not a gentle, grape-crushing dance. This is aggressive, industrial foot violence. They stomp, churn, and twist your tunic beneath their heels while muttering under their breath in Latin, probably something like, "I didn't survive the plague for this." Once the clothes have been properly marinated, they're hauled out with a large wooden fork and slapped onto a stone slab for scrubbing. This is where the elbow grease comes in. The fuller grabs a paddle, dips it in more suspicious liquid, and begins beating the tunic like it insulted their mother. Stains don't stand a chance. Neither does the fabric. Next comes the rinse, usually a quick dunk in a slightly less offensive liquid, like vinegar water or a communal well shared with horses, children, and several dead bugs. It's technically clean now, as in no longer visibly covered in sweat and street grime, but it now smells like someone tried to pickle a goat inside it. To finish the job, the tunic is dried in the sun, usually draped over a dusty wall or strung between two poles in the middle of a crowded alley. If you're lucky, it doesn't fall into a puddle of fish guts before it dries. If you're unlucky, it falls twice and gets stepped on by a goat named Felix, who has no remorse. You come back in the afternoon to pick up your now warped and weirdly crunchy tunic. You take a whiff. Bad idea. The scent hits your nose like betrayal. It's a heady cocktail of ammonia, sun-baked wool, and ancient sorrow. But it's dry, it's clean, and it's yours. If you're a rich Roman, your laundry might smell slightly better. Maybe. Wealthy citizens sometimes sent their clothes to be finished with sulfur treatments to whiten the fabric, a process which involved hanging the garments in sealed rooms filled with sulfur dioxide gas, basically a giant fumigation chamber for your toga. It worked, sort of, but also left your clothes with a hauntingly acidic aftertaste and increased the likelihood that your closet was technically a health hazard. And don't even think about washing things at home. For one, you'd need water, soap, and somewhere to dry it that wasn't already occupied by chickens. Also, soap isn't soap. It's lye mixed with animal fat, which is just one bad ratio away from a chemical burn. That's why you take your tunic to the professionals. Because yes, it's humiliating, but at least you won't accidentally melt your hands trying to get grass stains out of your subligaculum. So here you are, wearing your newly laundered tunic. It smells like fear and regret, but hey, it's not actively crunchy anymore. You scratch at your neck, where the cloth now feels extra stiff, and you try not to think about whose feet were dancing inside that vat just a few hours ago. Roman cleanliness is a performance, a ritual, an act of communal suffering designed to make you look clean while smelling like someone boiled socks in despair. But you're used to it. Everyone stinks. No one complains. And if your neighbors raise an eyebrow, just remind them, it's vintage Phalonica chic. Now, let's talk about Roman underwear, or lack thereof. Romans weren't big on undergarments. Most people went commando under their tunics, breezy, yes, but also risky on a windy forum day. Some wore a subligaculum, basically a leather diaper with string. It chafes. It rides up. It's not ideal. Let's be honest. In the grand history of uncomfortable fashion choices, the Romans took an early lead. If you're picturing yourself striding confidently through the marble streets of Rome with nothing but a tunic between you and the elements, congratulations. You now understand why Roman statues never smile. Underwear, in the modern sense, wasn't really a thing. No boxers, no briefs, no elastic waistbands or moisture-wicking fabric, no laundry drawer full of colourful options. The average Roman just slipped on their tunic and hoped for the best. If you bent over to tie your sandal, that breeze up your back, that's your business now public. But for the rare souls who dared to wear actual undergarments, the subligaculum was the go-to. It came in two main styles. A strip of cloth wrapped around the hips and between the legs like a linen thong for masochists, or the slightly fancier version that looked like a loincloth meets diaper hybrid. It was usually secured with string or a belt, and it stayed in place the same way a determined toddler stays in a high chair barely. Now, wearing a subligaculum came with consequences. For one, the material. Leather sounds cool in theory. In practice? Imagine wrapping your tenderest areas in a stiff, sweaty cowhide. On a hot Roman day, it's like marinating your nether regions in a portable oven. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't bend. It holds onto every drop of moisture like it's collecting taxes. And then there's the movement factor. Every step you take, it shifts. One wrong lunge while trying to chase your runaway goat, and suddenly you're flossing with rawhide. Running? Don't even think about it. Climbing stairs? May the gods have mercy on your groin. If you were a gladiator, you didn't have a choice. The subligaculum was part of the uniform. You wore it in the arena, usually paired with a belt, one sandal, and the haunting awareness that a whole stadium could see up your thigh. Your leather underwear might be the only thing between you and total nudity, assuming it didn't snap mid-somersault. Which happened. A lot. Audience reactions ranged from cheers to awkward silence to philosophical discussion about the fragility of dignity. Women, meanwhile, had their own unique brand of discomfort. Some wore a strophium, essentially a linen boob sash wrapped tightly around the chest like an ancient sports bra with no stretch. It didn't offer much support, but it did help flatten things out under the layers of tunic and stola. Comfort, again, was not the goal. Modesty was, or at least the illusion of it, because let's be honest, linen's not exactly known for being opaque after a sweat-inducing walk uphill. And let's not forget athletes. Roman wrestlers and runners wore minimal clothing, basically a subligaculum and pride. This made for aerodynamic motion and maximum awkwardness for everyone watching. Greco-Roman wrestling? That's just two nearly naked men trying to hold on to dignity and leverage. Bonus points if your opponent accidentally yanks your string. For everyone else, Commando was just easier, fewer layers to deal with, fewer ties to untie when nature called. Less risk of getting caught in a wardrobe malfunction where the subligaculum ends up around your knees at the exact wrong moment. If something needed adjusting, you just subtly shook your leg and hoped no one noticed. But with great freedom comes great chafing. And Roman streets weren't exactly paved with comfort. Dust, sand, and questionable puddles coated everything, including your lower half. Every breeze brought potential exposure. Every squat by the roadside fountain brought risk. Privacy wasn't a thing. Underwear wasn't either. You were out here raw-dogging history like a true Roman. Still, the Romans didn't see it as odd. To them, it was practical, streamlined, efficient. Why wear extra layers when you live in a climate that feels like a clay oven for half the year? And laundry? That was someone else's job. Preferably someone ankle-deep in a vat of urine down at the Phallonica. So you make peace with it. You get used to the awkward shifting, the strange looks when you sit cross-legged in the forum, and the constant need to subtly adjust your tunic whenever you walk past a gusty alley. Because in Rome, modesty wasn't a virtue, it was a challenge. And underwear? That was a gamble most weren't willing to take. Now that you're appropriately uncomfortable, let's move on to something far worse. Roman women's fashion. Draped, pinned, and designed by someone who hated convenience. If you're a Roman woman, fashion means layers. Stola, palla, fibulae. You're wrapped like a sleepy burrito and pinned with enough metal to set off airport security. Try running in it. You can't. Which, for society, was the point. Your morning routine starts with a sigh and a whole lot of fabric. First, you slip on a tunica interior, a basic linen undertunic that is, essentially, your ancient version of a slip. It's the only thing that feels remotely breathable. Unfortunately, it will be your last moment of freedom. Everything that comes next is designed to restrict, reshape, and rebrand you as the ideal Roman matron, modest, silent, and entirely incapable of escaping a social gathering. Over your tunic you don the stola, the star of the Roman woman's wardrobe. This isn't a cute summer dress. The stola is a long, heavy, sleeveless gown that reaches your ankles and clings to your figure in ways that make stairs, chairs, and sudden movements feel like tactical negotiations. It's held up by thick shoulder straps, which often slide off at the worst possible moments, like mid-offering at the temple, or while yelling at your child in the forum. You might think, freedom of motion. But no, the stola isn't designed for movement. It's designed for virtue, or at least the appearance of it. The fuller the fabric, the more respectable you seem. You want to look like you spend all day reclining in a garden reading philosophy, not running after chickens or carrying amphorae. Running, in fact, is unladylike. Running means urgency, and urgency implies that you have opinions, and nobody wants that. Next comes the palla, the ultimate symbol of Roman femininity and frustration. It's a rectangular shawl, usually wool, sometimes linen, and always eager to escape your shoulders at the most inconvenient time. It's meant to be draped over your head like a veil, especially when you go out in public, because nothing says respectable like being wrapped in itchy anonymity. Now here's the fun part, securing it all. Enter the fibulae. These are the brooches, pins, and assorted medieval murder weapons you use to keep your layers in place. Some are plain bronze. Others are ornate, jeweled, or shaped like little hands or animals. All of them are pointy, really pointy. And if one of them unfastens mid-stride, congratulations, you've just stabbed your own shoulder. Or worse, your palla has fallen off in front of the wrong crowd and you're now one exposed elbow away from being called indecent. Fashion, you see, isn't just about appearance, it's about surveillance. These layers keep you modest, yes, but they also make sure you're not going anywhere fast. It's clothing with built-in social control. You're not just getting dressed, you're being wrapped in expectations. A Roman woman is supposed to look elegant, not comfortable. Graceful, not practical. Mysterious, not mobile. And let's not forget the footwear. You're slipping your aching feet into sandals that are less supportive than your cousin Marcus during a family argument. They have thin soles, minimal straps, and a charming ability to pick up every sharp pebble on the road. Don't even think about running errands across town. You'll arrive with bleeding toes and the emotional stability of a dropped amphora. Now add accessories. Maybe a leather belt if you're feeling fancy. Maybe a necklace glass beads if you're poor. Gold if you married well. Pearls if you married very well. And your husband hasn't died from a suspicious oyster yet. Bracelets? Sure, as long as they don't jingle too loudly and make people think you're a dancer. Earrings? Go for it, just remember. Everything you wear will be judged by your neighbours, your mother-in-law, and the random widow who glares at you from across the fountain. Hairstyle? Oh, you thought you were done. Sweet summer citizen. Wealthy Roman women don't just comb their hair. They engineer it. Curls, braids, and buns stacked so high they defy gravity and common sense. And who's doing all this? Not you. A slave with calloused hands and 1,000-yard stare, who's been twisting hair into intricate patterns since before sunrise. Once you're fully dressed, pinned, and shellacked into your social role, you step out into the street carefully. One wrong movement, and your hem drags in something unspeakable. One gust of wind, and your veil is now tangled in your jewelry. And if you trip, you don't just fall. You perform a dramatic, slow-motion collapse under 40 pounds of dignity and wool. So yes, Roman women looked elegant, regal, composed. But underneath those layers was a person who hadn't sneezed properly in a decade, couldn't reach for anything above shoulder height, and lived in fear of catching their dress on a goat. Next up, let's see how the men handled their own ridiculous outfit, the infamous Roman toga. Spoiler, it's worse. You're a Roman senator now. Congrats. That means you get a toga, 17 feet of heavy wool, that must be arranged just so. It slips, it sags, it looks majestic for 10 seconds. Then you trip over it in front of the emperor and rethink your life choices. The toga is not clothing. The toga is a test. A soft, woolen nightmare with no seams, no fasteners, and no mercy. It's not something you put on, it's something you negotiate with. Wearing one requires the patience of a monk, the spatial awareness of an origami master, and the upper body strength of a gladiator. This isn't just an outfit, it's an endurance sport. First, the basics. Your toga is a single semicircular piece of fabric, approximately 6 meters long and 2 meters wide. It weighs as much as a medium-sized child and folds like a cursed bedsheet. To wear it properly, you must drape it over your left shoulder, wrap it under your right arm, bring it back up over your left shoulder again, and somehow form the iconic sinus, a loose fold that functions as a very stylish snack pouch or emergency scroll holder. In theory. In practice, it never sits right. The fold slips. The drape droops. The back bunches up like a woolen hemorrhoid. And every time you lift your arm to gesture in the Senate, the whole thing threatens to unravel like a soft-serve tragedy. One sneeze and suddenly you're half naked and being written into someone else's political cartoon. Oh, and did I mention, you're not allowed to wear a belt. No fasteners, no pins. The whole thing relies on balance, friction, and the quiet terror that if you move too quickly, you'll moon the tribunes. This is why senators walk slowly, not out of dignity, out of survival. The color of your toga is also important. As a senator, you wear the toga praetexta, a white toga with a wide purple stripe along the border. That purple isn't just for flair. It's a symbol of power, rank, and how many slaves you've terrified into maintaining your hemline. The dye used, Tyrian purple, was extracted from thousands of sea snails and cost more than a house. So yes, you're technically wearing marine, snail goo to your morning debates. Congratulations. Now, let's talk about getting dressed. You don't put a toga on alone. You can try, but it will end with you tangled in a wool cocoon, face down on the floor, mumbling about Cicero and regretting your career choices. Realistically, you need at least one slave too, if you're in a hurry. They'll spread the toga across the floor, lift it like a sail, and wrap it around your increasingly claustrophobic body while you try not to fall over. Once you're in, you stay in. Bathroom breaks? Strategic planning. Sitting down? Good luck. The toga is not optimized for chairs, or stairs, or doors, or turning around too quickly. You sit with great care, like a man balancing a souffle on his lap. And if you drop something, it's gone forever. The Roman toga does not allow for bending, but despite all this suffering, the toga is non-negotiable. If you show up to a public event without it, you might as well be in your underpants. It's not just clothing, it's identity. A toga says, I have power, I have status, I have access to terrible fabric decisions. It's a social contract made of wool. For ceremonial events, the toga candida, bright white and heavily bleached, was worn by men running for office. The whiteness was meant to symbolize moral purity, which is ironic because most candidates had the ethical clarity of a raccoon in a bakery. The bleaching process used chalk and sometimes even lead-based compounds, meaning every campaign rally came with a side of slow poisoning. And then there's the toga pulla, a dark-colored toga worn during mourning. Somber, yes, but also finally an outfit that matched how most people actually felt wearing the thing, deeply uncomfortable and full of existential dread. In hot weather, the toga becomes a personal sauna. Sweat pools under your armpits. The wool traps every degree of heat like a betrayal blanket. You try to maintain your dignity, but you're basically slow cooking yourself in ceremonial fabric. Add the smell of the forum fish, olives, and desperation, and you're one toga twist away from fainting onto a marble bench and making Senate history. And yet, everyone pretends it's fine. You nod, you glide, you sweat silently. Because being a Roman senator isn't about comfort, it's about presentation. You wear the toga not because it works, but because it declares you're important enough to suffer this much fabric in public. So the next time you complain about putting on a suit or ironing your shirt for a Zoom call, remember, at least your outfit doesn't require an engineering degree and 2 assistants with excellent hand-eye coordination. Next, let's move on to the humble Roman shoe, because even your feet weren't safe from historical disappointment. Your feet? Always exposed, always dirty. Calci if you're fancy, sandals if you're not. They have no cushioning and 0 arch support. A cobblestone street feels like walking on angry gravel. Also, socks aren't a thing yet. Your toes hate you. Welcome to the Roman footwear experience, where style is minimal, pain is maximal, and every step is a tiny act of defiance against your own skeletal system. Let's start with the basics. If you're an average Roman citizen, and statistically, you're wearing soli, the go-to sandal for most of the empire. These are flat leather slabs with a few straps to keep them from flying off your feet. There's no left or right shoe. They're identical, reversible, and fully committed to making both feet equally miserable. You tie them with leather thongs that either snap mid-stride or slowly grind your ankle into submission. The leather stiffens in the heat, curls in the cold, and generally behaves like it's offended by the concept of your existence. If you're wealthy or trying to look like you are, you might sport calci. These are closed-toe leather shoes, imagine Roman loafers, but louder. They're dyed red or black depending on your rank, and they lace up the front like sad ancient bowling shoes. The calci are mainly worn by senators, magistrates, and people who sit down a lot. Why? Because they are not built for walking, or standing, or having feet, really. But they look respectable, and in Roman society that's half the battle. The other half is not collapsing from foot cramps halfway through a speech. Soldiers, of course, got their own special brand of torture, the caligae. These are heavy-duty hobnailed boots that look like sandals went through a bad breakup. The soles are thick, nailed with metal studs for traction, and built to endure hundreds of miles across Europe. Unfortunately, they're also built to destroy your arches and absolutely wreck your heels. The studs give great grip in muddy terrain, but turn cobbled streets into percussion instruments. Imagine trying to sneak up on someone while wearing a tap-dancing floor on each foot. And socks? Not a thing. Not officially. The Romans didn't really invent socks. Though a few clever soldiers may have wrapped bits of cloth around their feet in colder provinces, it wasn't common practice. So, 9 times out of 10, it's just you, your sweaty toes, and leather that absorbs every odor like it's collecting them for a museum exhibit. Now, remember, Roman roads are marvels of engineering, if you're a cart. For feet, they're a minefield. Uneven paving stones, loose gravel, mysterious puddles, and the occasional chicken droppings create a walking surface that feels less like civic pride and more like a punishment designed by foot-hating philosophers. You take one cautious step after another, adjusting your balance like a nervous tightrope walker while hoping your sandal doesn't get caught in a crack wide enough to eat a toddler, and cleaning your shoes. Forget about it. You wear them until they fall apart. Then you either repair them, if you have the skills or a friendly cobbler nearby, or you just shrug and accept that the gods want you barefoot. In rural areas, many people skip shoes entirely. Why spend your hard-earned denarii on foot pain when you can just build up calluses and develop an immunity to scorpions? Now, if you're a woman, your footwear options are about the same. Sandals and soft-soled slippers dominate the market, with occasional attempts at fancy embroidery or decoration. But heels? Pumps? Anything remotely stylish and also functional? No. You're wearing the same uncomfortable slabs as everyone else, only now you're expected to glide gracefully through the forum without tripping over your stola, because society. Oh, and let's not forget the campagus, a kind of open boot used in colder or rougher regions, often with cross-laced leather that goes halfway up your shin. These boots look intimidating and provide ankle support, but they're also just taller, moodier sandals that trap mud, sweat, and tiny rocks like a Roman Pinterest board for discomfort. The upside? No laces to tie, no tongue to adjust, no socks to match. The downside? Everything else. Still, shoes had symbolic power. Certain styles and colors were restricted by class. A red shoe might mark a high-ranking senator. Black could denote mourning. And if you wore shoes indoors at a banquet, you were either very rich or very rude. Sometimes both. So here you are, hobbling through the empire, blisters blooming, sandals squeaking, toes caked in dust. Every step is a reminder that the Romans conquered the known world wearing shoes barely more advanced than flip-flops, which either makes them incredibly brave or chronically numb below the knees. Now that your feet are fully offended, let's talk about childhood, because Roman kids wore these same miserable shoes, only smaller, and usually on the wrong feet. Roman children didn't get stylish outfits. They got smaller versions of adult clothes. Mini tunics, little togas for special days, and lots of dirt. Most of their outfits are stained with whatever they stepped in, touched, or tried to eat. If you've ever tried dressing a modern toddler, you already understand Roman parenting. Only in ancient Rome there's no elastic waistband, no cartoon character pajamas, no Velcro shoes to speed things up. Just linen, string, and the chaos of trying to clothe a child who thinks standing still is a personal insult. The daily outfit? A tiny tunic cut from scratchy wool or cheap linen, often hand-me-downs from 3 older siblings, and probably patched together with more hope than thread. It's a shapeless sack with armholes and a head opening, and if you're lucky, it lands somewhere near the knees. It's not fitted. It's not fashionable. It's a potato sack with ambitions. There are no pants. Pants are barbaric. Literally. Romans associated trousers with uncivilized foreigners, so if your toddler is running around with bare legs and a tunic flapping like a superhero, cape, that's just normal Tuesday behavior. Underwear? Optional. Shoes? Rare. Dirt? Constant. You try to keep them clean, you do. But every surface in Rome is a sensory playground covered in grime. Cobblestone streets? Sticky from spilled wine and yesterday's fish market. Public fountains? Full of suspicious bubbles. The family dog? Also not bathed. Ever. The average Roman child is equal parts skin, tunic, and mysterious crust. For special occasions like religious festivals, birthdays, or if a relative with money is visiting, they get a toga praetexta, a miniature version of the senator's toga with a purple stripe. It's ceremonial, uncomfortable, and deeply impractical for anyone under 4 feet tall. Dressing a squirming child in one of these is like trying to gift wrap a slippery eel. You secure the folds as best you can, say a quiet prayer to Jupiter, and hope they don't trip into a brazier. Young boys also wore an amulet called a bulla, a round locket filled with charms or protective items. It's usually made of leather, bronze, or gold if the family's wealthy. The bulla was meant to ward off evil spirits, and, presumably, the consequences of licking lead-based paint off temple walls. Boys wore their bulla until they came of age. Girls, meanwhile, got less. Perhaps a ribbon. Or, if you're really lucky, a maternal sigh of vague approval. Now, if you're picturing Roman children playing gentle games in a sun-dappled courtyard, adjust your expectations. Games included things like wrestling in the dust, throwing walnuts at each other, and daring one another to touch gross things in alleyways. They played with toys, simple wooden dolls, spinning tops, or knuckle bones, aka sheep ankle bones repurposed into dice. But mostly, they improvised. If it could be thrown, balanced, or climbed on, it was a toy. Clothes didn't last long in this environment. The tunic gets tugged, rolled, and dragged across stone, goat, and whatever's fermenting by the market stalls. Stains weren't a bug, they were a feature. Wine, oil, mud, urine, charcoal dust, you name it, it's on the tunic. And since Roman laundry means soaking things in pee and stomping on them in a communal vat, many parents decided it was easier to just let the kids exist in a low-grade state of filth until Saturnalia. Wealthier families might have household slaves assigned to watch the children, and by watch, we mean chase them around shouting, "Please don't eat that." They'd help with dressing, feeding, and dragging the kids to school, where the outfit didn't change. Still the same tunic, maybe with a belt if the child was old enough not to weaponize it. And shoes? If a child had shoes, they were probably tied wrong and on the wrong feet. Sandals that flopped with every step, or boots inherited from an older cousin with wildly different-sized toes. Sometimes children went barefoot, which made sense, since they spent most of their time outdoors anyway. Indoors was for sleeping, coughing, or eating whatever stew was bubbling in the corner. Fashion wasn't a concept Roman children had much time for. They were busy growing up fast, dodging chores, learning Latin grammar, and getting yelled at for knocking over amphorae. No one expected them to look tidy. If a child showed up to a family gathering spotless and well-dressed, people got suspicious. Is he sick? Why doesn't he smell like sheep dung? Has he joined a cult? So there you are, your child has climbed into a barrel, the toga's halfway off, the bulla is in someone's soup, and they're crying because they stepped on a lizard. Just another ordinary day. Next, let's look at what happens when it rains, because Roman outerwear is just as terrible, but now it's wet. Slaves didn't get options. Some wore basic tunics, some wore nothing at all. Identification came from scars, brands, or humiliating collars. Comfort wasn't a place priority. Dignity? Even less so. Welcome to the fashion underworld. If you're a Roman slave, your wardrobe is less about expression and more about suppression. Your clothes are not yours. Your body, legally, isn't either. You are property, and that fact is stitched, burned, and buckled into every thread or lack thereof on your back. Most slaves wore the bare minimum. A rough, undyed tunic if they were lucky cheap linen or coarse wool, cut so poorly it made sackcloth look like evening wear. There were no belts, unless your master decided to give you one. No layers, no colours, no decorative flourishes. You wore what was issued to you, and you wore it until it disintegrated, or until someone more important wanted it back. Some slaves didn't get a tunic at all, especially those working in hot, brutal conditions like the fields, the mines, or the kitchens. In those environments, clothing was considered a nuisance, or a waste of fabric. You might be naked year-round, your skin, burnt from the sun and scarred from labour. It wasn't scandalous. it was standard. The most visible slave fashion accessory wasn't clothing at all, it was the collar. These were iron or bronze neck rings, sometimes padlocked, often inscribed. The inscriptions were usually practical: the owner's name, a command to return the bearer if found, or instructions to deliver the slave back for a reward. Like a pet tag, except much sadder and with more chafing. Imagine walking through a Roman market with that collar clanking against your collarbone, reminding everyone, yourself included, that your entire existence can be summarized by a metal sentence welded to your neck. It's not just dehumanizing, it's loud. You can't sneak, you can't rest your head comfortably, you can't forget who owns you, not even for a second. And then there's the branding. Some slaves were marked by hot iron, with symbols or letters burned into their arms, backs, or foreheads. It was a permanent label of shame and ownership. Even if you managed to buy your freedom one day, the scars remained. Fashion, in this case, was weaponized. Your body became the canvas of someone else's control. Footwear? Almost never. Most slaves went barefoot, even in winter, even on jagged streets, even while carrying amphorae or cleaning the vomitorium floor for the third time that morning. If you were in a wealthy household and serving guests, maybe you got sandals because nobody wants to see dirty feet while they're eating stuffed dormouse. But those sandals weren't for you. They were for the appearance of the household. If you worked indoors, perhaps as a scribe, tutor, or house servant, you might get slightly better fabric, a thinner tunic, a stitched hem, but only because you were more visible. The second you became an eyesore, someone would toss you a cleaner rag and tell you to make it work. Dignity came second. Presentation came first. Your role wasn't to exist, it was to enhance someone else's. Children born into slavery got even less. They started life naked, stayed that way for a while, and when they were old enough to be useful, were given miniature versions of the same ugly tunics. There were no toys, no special outfits, no sentimental hand-me-downs, just the ever-present sense that your body, and what covered it, belonged to someone else. Even hairstyles were controlled. Some masters shaved their slaves' heads to mark them clearly, or reduce the spread of lice. Others required certain hairstyles to make their property more presentable. You weren't allowed to grow your hair long unless your owner decided it suited the aesthetic of their atrium. You weren't allowed to cut it if they preferred it long. Your head was a billboard. Your scalp was their signature. And yet, despite all this, slaves adapted. They stitched scraps together. They bartered for pins. They found discarded fabric and wrapped it creatively to protect against weather or injury. It wasn't fashion. It was survival disguised as style. A whispered resistance sewn into folds. Occasionally, a wealthy slave, perhaps a trusted steward or tutor, might wear something nicer to reflect their master's status. People would see them on the street and say, "Ah, that slave is well treated." But under that soft wool was still a branded chest, a collar hidden beneath a scarf, and a soul doing mental cartwheels to stay in line. So if you've ever complained about itchy tags, tight shoes, or synthetic fibers, remember this: Roman slaves wore misery. Their wardrobe wasn't a choice, it was a sentence. Let's move now from the basement of the Roman social ladder to the pinnacle, the emperor's wardrobe. Spoiler alert, it's still ridiculous. Just more gold. You're a gladiator. You wear a leather loincloth, a single shin guard, a helmet that weighs as much as your regrets, and maybe a net. This isn't battle armor, it's a fashion show for the bloodthirsty crowd. Practicality is optional. Drama is mandatory. Stepping into the arena isn't just a fight, it's a performance. And like all great performances, it begins with a costume designed to be more dramatic than useful. Gladiator gear wasn't about protection. It was about aesthetics. You're not here to survive. You're here to look good bleeding. Let's start at the bottom. First, the subligaculum, your trusty leather loincloth. It's tied tightly around your waist and tucked in with the vague hope that it'll stay put when you start flipping over people. Spoiler: it doesn't always. This garment leaves very little to the imagination and absolutely nothing to spare in a wardrobe malfunction. It's less battle attire and more strapped ham. Next, you get some armor. But not the normal kind, like full breastplates or chainmail. No, you get selective armor. A single ochre or shin guard, usually made of metal or thick leather, strapped to one leg. One. The idea isn't to protect both shins, what are you, greedy? It's to make you visually lopsided and interesting. The audience wants variety. Also, you're supposed to lean into your attacks a certain way, so maybe one shin survives. Maybe. Your sword hand might get a manica, a flexible sleeve of leather or metal scales wrapping your arm in the ancient equivalent of a tube sock made of pain. It offers decent protection but also doubles as a sweat incubator. After 10 minutes in the arena sun, your arm is cooking like a leg of lamb in chainmail. Then there's the helmet. Oh, the helmet. Big, heavy, and about as breathable as a clay jug. They came in a variety of styles. Some with visors, shaped like demons. Some with giant crests. Some with face grills that make you look like an angry mailbox. It's terrifying, claustrophobic, and deeply theatrical. The kind of helmet that says, "I'm here to die, but I want to be memorable doing it." You can't see much through it. Peripheral vision, gone. Hearing, muffled. Breathing, a wheezing compromise. And yet, you're expected to dodge spears, parry blows, and read your opponent's moves, all while wearing a metal pumpkin on your head that's been baking in the sun since breakfast. Your gear also depends on your type. Because yes, gladiators came in flavors, like a tragic Roman Pokemon lineup. If you're a retiarius, you fight with a net and a trident. That's right, a net. You wear minimal armor, no helmet, and rely entirely on agility, sass, and your ability to tangle someone long enough to jab them with a giant seafood fork. You look like a fisherman who took a wrong turn into a nightmare. If you're a secutor, you're the retiarius's enemy, heavily armored with a smooth, rounded helmet and small eye holes, designed specifically to avoid getting caught in a net. It works, kind of. But you also sweat buckets and bump into things a lot, which is fine, because you're holding a short sword and a big rectangular shield, basically a giant metal door you drag around like a turtle with aggression issues. Then there's the Mamillo, big helmet with a fish crest, large shield, standard sword. You're built like a tank, and move like one too. Slow, deliberate, and just sweaty enough to make everyone around you uncomfortable. But whatever your type, the costume isn't random. It's carefully curated, like a Bloodsport fashion week. Gladiator outfits weren't just about combat, they were about character. The Roman audience wanted to know who you were. Were you the underdog? The villain? The flashy net guy with trust issues? Your gear told the story before the fight even began. And it was designed to be unfair. Lopsided matchups were intentional. The Retiarius had reach, but no armor. The Secutor had armor, but terrible mobility. It created drama, suspense, a reason to cheer. It's less about who's better, and more about who can improvise a dramatic death spiral, into the sand with flair. Oh, and did I mention? You don't get to choose your outfit. That's decided by your lanista, your trainer, manager, and occasional life coach. He picks what you wear, who you fight, and when. Fashion agency? Zero. You're a walking costume change, a breathing plot twist. After the fight, assuming you survive, your gear is peeled off by assistants. You're bruised, bleeding, and possibly missing a tooth. But hey, the helmet made you look awesome. You limp back to the barracks, your net dragging behind you like a sad fish in mourning, and hope that next time they give you more than one shin guard. So, yes, gladiator fashion was iconic. It was thrilling. It was utterly impractical. But that was the point. Next up, let's enter the royal wardrobe, where the emperor wears enough silk and jewels to blind a goat, and somehow still ends up looking like a couch. Roman soldiers had standard kit, tunic, belt, armor, cloak, but no socks, no waterproofs. Marching across Europe with frozen feet and swamp crotch was a rite of passage. At least your bronze helmet looks good. You're a legionary now, one of Rome's finest. You've pledged loyalty to the eagle standard, your centurion, and the occasional promise of plunder. But mostly, you've pledged yourself to discomfort. Because nothing says military discipline like trudging across hostile terrain in a wool tunic and sandals, armed with a stabbing sword, and the knowledge that your toes might fall off. Let's start with the base layer. The tunic. It's short-sleeved, knee-length, and made of scratchy wool that somehow manages to trap both heat and cold, depending on what you least need at the moment. In summer, it's a mobile sauna. In winter, it's a thin sheet of disappointment. There's no insulation, no underlayer. You are one strong breeze away from frostbite and divided by or accidental indecent exposure. Next, the belt, the cingulum militar, a wide leather strap decorated with jangly bits of metal that jingle with every step, just in case the enemy needed a heads up. It holds your sword and adds a dramatic flair to your otherwise flavorless outfit. It also pinches your waist every time you bend over to tie your sandals, which, fun fact, are held together by spite and wet leather. Those sandals? Caligay. They're open-toed, hobnailed, and designed to let the blood drain out when your foot is injured, which is less a clever innovation and more a chilling hint that getting injured is just expected. They offer no padding, no waterproofing, no forgiveness. You cross the Alps in these. You wade through British bogs in these. You fight Germanic tribes in these. And you do it all with exposed heels and an increasing sense of betrayal from your footwear. Socks? Not standard issue. Some soldiers may have improvised with cloth wraps in colder regions. Gaul, Britannia, anywhere you can see your breath and question your life choices. But officially, socks were for civilians. You, the proud Roman soldier, are expected to embrace the full barefoot chic experience while ice forms between your toes. Let's talk armor. You wear lorica segmentata, those iconic overlapping iron strips that look like a mechanical armadillo wrapped itself around your chest. It's heavy, clunky, and a nightmare to put on without pinching at least 3 parts of your torso. But once you're strapped in, you do feel invincible. Briefly, until it starts to rain and the metal absorbs cold like it's training for a career in refrigeration. Under the armor, you might wear a padded linen vest to prevent bruising. Or not. Depends on what's available, how much your centurion likes you, and whether or not you remembered to bribe the quartermaster last time. On your head, a galea, the standard issue bronze helmet with cheek guards, and sometimes a neck plate. It looks impressive, intimidating, heroic. It also amplifies every shout, clang, and wind gust into your cray, ears like an amphitheater of chaos. You learn quickly to flinch at echoes. Over everything, you get the sagum, a heavy wool cloak designed to keep you warm and vaguely dry. It does neither. It soaks up rain like a sponge and dries only if exposed to direct sunlight and divine intervention. You fasten it with a brooch at your shoulder, but the brooch rusts, the fabric sags, and within minutes, it's just a damp wool blanket clinging to your back like a needy sheep. Now, imagine all of this while carrying a pilum, spear, a gladius, short stabbing sword, a shield the size of a door, a week's worth of grain, a cooking pot, a spare pair of sandals, and a shovel. Yes, a shovel. Because when you're not marching or fighting, you're digging trenches, building camps, or burying your hopes of staying dry ever again. Your average day? March 20 miles, set up camp, eat barley mush, sleep on the ground, wake up stiff, and do it again. Every single day, rain, shine, or sudden barbarian. Ambush. And yet somehow it works. Roman soldiers conquered half the known world in this gear. They outlasted winters in Germania, summers in Syria, and political speeches from emperors who'd never marched more than 15 feet. Their uniforms may have been uncomfortable, but they were consistent, rugged, and intimidating enough to make rebels think twice. So as your feet blister, your cloak mildews, and your helmet slowly frostbites your scalp, take solace in this. You look awesome. From a distance. In the fog. When no one can smell you. Next up. Let's explore what Rome's wealthiest wore at home, because when you're rich, even your lounging robe is pure drama. Your choices are linen for heat, wool for cold, and if you're rich, silk for flexing. All of them itch eventually. Washing takes effort, and dyeing it is expensive. So most people walk around looking like sad oatmeal. Let's begin with linen, the go-to fabric for anyone trying to survive a Roman summer without turning into a human stew. Linen comes from the flax plant, which means it's technically natural, breathable, and probably the most comfortable thing a Roman will ever wear. Unfortunately, the comfort ends there. Linen wrinkles like a toddler's tantrum, stains permanently when looked at by wine, and frays faster than your patience at the Senate. It's also difficult to make. The process of turning flax into linen requires soaking, drying, pounding, combing, spinning, weaving, and several minor miracles. So if you're wearing linen, you're either wealthy enough to afford it or enslaved enough to have made it. Either way, the final product is a tunic that feels breezy in the morning and like wet newspaper by lunchtime. Now, wool. Wool. The fabric of the people, the empire, and your eternal discomfort. It's everywhere in Rome. Thick in winter, thinner in summer, always with the texture of a gentle rash. Wool is warm, yes, but it also traps heat like a desperate secret. You'll sweat under it. You'll itch under it. You'll try to adjust it politely while making conversation, and then eventually give up and just scratch your ribs against a pillar. Wool comes from sheep, obviously, and Rome is full of them alive, dead, or mid-transformation into cloaks. The wool is sheared, cleaned, badly, spun into thread, and woven into fabric that may or may not still smell like the sheep it came from. Spoiler, it usually does. And then we have silk. Glorious, shiny, ostentatious silk. If you are rich really, truly rich, you wear silk imported from China via the Silk Road. It costs more per ounce than gold. Wearing it in public is like walking around with a blinking sign that says, "Please rob me, I'm terrible with money." It's illegal for men to wear all silk garments, by the way. Rome said no to full silk togas because they were seen as too feminine, too foreign, and too fabulous for official use. So naturally, wealthy Romans wore them anyway. But silk isn't just expensive, it's high maintenance. It stains if you breathe on it. It snags on literally everything. And if you're caught in the rain, it clings like betrayal and becomes transparent in ways that make toga parties far more dramatic than intended. Now let's talk color. Most Roman fabrics are some shade of beige, off-white, or suspiciously greyish tan. Why? Because dyeing fabric is a luxury. Good dyes are expensive, imported, or made from deeply unfortunate sources. Like Tyrian purple, extracted from thousands of crushed sea snails and used primarily for high-ranking officials' garments. The process stinks. Literally. The dye vats smell like seafood crime scenes, and the color clings so permanently that your hands may stay purple forever. Other colors, like red or yellow, were easier to produce using plant roots or minerals, but the results were muted. Think muddy marigold, or sunset dipped in dirt, and the fabric faded fast. One trip to the Phalonica for cleaning, and your tunic goes from vibrant rust to expired hummus. Speaking of cleaning, good luck. Laundry in Rome involves philonicae, public laundries where clothes are soaked in human urine, stomped on, rinsed, beaten, and laid out to dry in the sun like soggy regrets. Urine contains ammonia, which helps break down stains, but it also permanently embeds your tunic with the smell of old tavern floors. The result? Your linen might look cleaner, but it smells like betrayal. Clothes weren't changed daily either. Most Romans owned one, maybe two outfits. You wore them until they stood up on their own, or your neighbor hinted that your toga was starting to develop a personality. The truly wealthy had more variety, different tunics for different occasions, cloaks for travel, gowns for banquets. But even then, comfort was always a distant second to appearance. And layering? A nightmare. Imagine putting on a linen tunic, a wool cloak, and a decorative sash all before noon in a city that smells like roasted fish and political corruption. You either bake, sweat, or commit to the fashion-induced fever dream. So when you see marble statues draped in pristine folds of fabric, know this. Reality was not so elegant. Real Roman clothing sagged, stretched, stained, and itched. People walked around like angry dumplings wrapped in wool burritos. No one looked that good. No one felt that good. And yet, somehow, they made it work. Because when everyone's wearing sad oatmeal, nobody's judging your wrinkles. Next, let's peek into Rome's most confusing trend: togas. Draped, dramatic, and cursed by geometry. You want to show off? Jewelry it is. Rings, necklaces, brooches. If you're rich, it's gold. If you're poor, it's tin, pretending to be gold. And if you're wearing too much, people assume you're either nouveau riche or a thief. In Rome, jewelry wasn't just fashion, it was a full-blown social announcement. Every ring, every chain, every jangling trinket on your body screamed a message. I'm powerful. I'm fashionable. I possibly inherited this from a dead relative I didn't like. Whether it was tasteful or tacky was often beside the point. If it sparkled, it was working. Let's start with rings. Romans loved rings. Big ones, small ones, signet ones, secret poison ones. Rings were the ancient equivalent of a LinkedIn profile. A well-crafted signet ring wasn't just for decoration. It was your signature, your seal, and your key to any business deal worth its salt. You'd dip it in wax and stamp contracts, letters, or a pie if you were feeling dramatic. And the wealthier you were, the chunkier the ring. If it could double as a brass knuckle in a tavern fight, congratulations, you're upper class. But of course, you couldn't stop at just one. Some Romans wore rings on every finger. Multiple rings per finger, in fact. And while some were made of gold or silver with gemstones like amethyst, garnet, or carnelian, others were less authentic. Copper with a little polish. Lead with a good attitude. Poorer citizens made do with imitations, carefully crafted to catch the light just right while avoiding rain, scrutiny, or close inspection. Necklaces. Oh, they were everywhere. Gold chains, beads, pearls, even little charms shaped like phallic symbols for good luck and awkward conversations. If you were rich, you could afford a cascade of real gems imported from places you'd never even visit. If you were middle class, maybe one chain with a locket containing a lock of hair or possibly a dried-up good luck beetle. The line between sentimental and weird was often blurred. Brooches and fibulae were both fashion and function. These were the ancient safety pins that held your toga or tunic in place. But of course they had to be fancy. Why pin your garment with plain iron when you could use an enameled bronze dolphin clutching a ruby in its tail? Exactly. Subtlety is for cowards. Now let's talk earrings. Women wore them frequently: gold hoops, dangling gemstones, pearls the size of grapes. Wealthy women might change earrings with the seasons, or the hour, or the social occasion. Poorer women wore earrings too, but often ones that pinched, rusted, or made one ear mysteriously greener than the other. Style has a price, and sometimes that price is tetanus. Men wearing earrings? Less common. Unless you were a young boy, an enslaved person, or in certain professions that involved singing, dancing, or social services of the night. A man dripping in jewelry was either fabulously wealthy or famously ridiculous. Either way, people stared. Bracelets were also popular: coiled serpents, braided metal, chains with little charms. Some wore amulets for protection, others for attraction. The bulla, worn by children to ward off evil spirits, was essentially the Roman version of a baby's first bling. It stayed on until adulthood, or until the string broke, and someone's goat ate it. Of course, the real flex came with gemstones, not just wearing them, but knowing what they meant. Romans assigned meanings to stones like they were picking personality traits. Amethyst warded off drunkenness, though there's no evidence anyone tested this theory after 6 cups of wine. Emerald symbolized fertility. Carnelian meant courage. Wearing a bunch at once meant either you were very spiritual or you were hedging your bets. And where did all this jewelry come from? Well, some of it was imported, some of it was passed down, and a lot of it was looted. Rome didn't build an empire on hugs. After a good sacking, say, of a wealthy eastern city, it wasn't uncommon for generals and soldiers to return with a pocket full of gemstones and a vague memory of who they used to belong to. If you couldn't afford fine jewelry, there was always the second-hand market, or the third hand, or the just don't ask hand. There were even laws about who could wear what. The sumptuary laws tried to limit extravagance, especially among women, because nothing says patriarchy like, please stop being so sparkly, it's intimidating the senators. Of course, people ignored these laws constantly. If you had the coin and the confidence, you wore what you wanted, even if it made you clink with every step like a walking treasure chest. But too much jewelry? That got you mocked. Over-accessorizing was the mark of bad taste, or worse, a social climber. The kind of person who just made money and immediately spent it all at the jeweler's stall trying to look like they belonged at Caesar's dinner party. Newsflash, they didn't. So, if you were walking through Rome and saw someone glinting in the sun, you had to ask, are they rich? Are they fake? Are they about to get robbed? Next up, let's strip it all back literally and talk about Roman sleepwear. Spoiler, there isn't any. You grease your hair with olive oil, comb it with a seashell, and pray it doesn't smell like salad. Beards go in and out of style faster than you can grow one. Your barber is also your dentist. It's not a relaxing visit. Roman grooming was an Olympic-level balancing act of fashion, status, and sheer social pressure. Hair mattered a lot. And not just whether you had it, but how you wore it, how shiny it looked, and whether your barber had enough teeth to safely trim yours. Let's begin with your average Roman man. In a perfect world, he's clean-shaven with neatly cropped hair, greased to perfection and parted just so. But in Rome, perfection is subjective and highly influenced by whatever the emperor decides is hot that year. Augustus liked the clean-shaven look, so suddenly everyone had to look like a smooth baby senator. Then Hadrian came along with his intellectual beard, and bam, overnight, your stubbled jaw became an artistic statement. Beards weren't just facial hair, they were philosophical declarations. A big beard? You're a stoic. Maybe you read scrolls. Maybe you just forgot to shave. A clean face? You're disciplined, sophisticated, probably scared of lice. And the barber? He's your one-stop shop for haircuts, shaves, gossip, and occasional dental procedures like yanking teeth with the same tongs he uses to curl sideburns. There's no such thing as gentle. Just sit on a wobbly stool in the tonssur's booth and try not to flinch while he sharpens the razor on his thigh and starts a monologue about gladiator taxes. Barbershops were social hubs. Imagine a modern-day barbershop, but louder, smellier, and with more public tooth extractions. You went for a trim, stayed for the political arguments, and left with a slightly uneven fade and a mild case of ringworm. Now about that olive oil. Romans didn't have shampoo. Instead, they cleaned and styled their hair with a mix of oil and fine ash, or sometimes just plain olive oil. It was massaged into the scalp and combed through, with a bronze or bone comb. Bonus points if your comb had teeth that didn't snap off mid-swipe. The oil gave your hair shine, manageability, and a scent profile somewhere between fresh harvest and yesterday's stew. And what if your hair was thinning? Or already gone? Welcome to ancient Roman panic mode. Baldness was mocked relentlessly unless you were a military hero, philosopher, or so rich that people had to pretend it looked good. Everyone else tried disguises. Some wore wigs, others rubbed questionable pastes on their scalps, like crushed herbs mixed with vinegar, or goat dung soaked in honey seriously. There were no miracle cures, just sticky lies and shattered hope. Hair color, too, was a statement. Blondes were fashionable for a time, especially imported Germanic or Gallic blonde wigs often made from the hair of enslaved people. Redheads were considered exotic, sometimes magical, sometimes suspicious. Black hair was classic, but if you dyed your hair, everyone knew. Roman hair dye was about as subtle as a chariot pileup. You wanted raven black? You got burnt crow. You wanted golden? You got sickly mustard. It worked, just not in the way you hoped. Women's hair was another beast entirely. Styles ranged from simple buns to gravity-defying towers of curls, braids, and accessories. Wealthy Roman women employed hairdressers called ornatrices, who would spend hours sculpting their locks into complex arrangements that looked like pastry swirls had joined the Senate. Pins, ribbons, combs, and occasionally live insects, anything could end up in a Roman updo. Keeping it all in place? You guessed it, more olive oil. Possibly resin, wax, or lead-based powders for color and hold. It wasn't just about beauty, it was status armor. Elaborate hair said, "I have slaves. I have time. I have zero intention of doing my own laundry." And while the elite went for volume and decoration, working-class women kept it practical. Hair tied back, braided, or covered with a headscarf. Function over flair. Unless it was a festival day, in which case even your grandma might show up with beads in her bun and enough oil to deep fry a fig. Let's not forget children. Little boys wore their hair long until a coming-of-age ceremony where they'd finally get it cut short, symbolizing their entrance into manhood, responsibility, and bad hair days for the rest of their life. Girls often wore theirs in braids or buns until marriage, when hairstyles suddenly became about impressing mothers-in-law and securing social alliances. So there you are. You've been oiled, scraped, and scolded by your barber. Your curls are tight. Your beard is either freshly shaved or making a bold political statement. You smell faintly of salad and fear. And now, let's undress the final mystery, Roman sleepwear. Or, rather, the lack of it. Soap exists, but it's expensive, so most people use perfume, incense, or just layer new smells on top of old ones like a scent lasagna. Sweat, oil, goat. That's your base note. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where hygiene is subjective. If you thought the streets were a little ripe, just wait until you meet the people. And not because they're dirty on purpose, no, they're trying. Really. But when your bathwater is shared, your laundry involves urine, and your deodorant is melted resin in a jar, things can only smell so good. Let's start with soap. Yes, it existed. Romans had sapo, a rudimentary form of soap made from animal fat and ash, and it worked kind of. But it wasn't the go-to for most people. Why? Because good soap was expensive, and also mildly corrosive if you used it wrong. If you were poor, you washed with water and friction. If you were rich, you avoided soap altogether, and just slathered yourself in oils, scraped the grime off with a strigil, and called it a day. The strigil was a curved metal tool, sort of like a spatula for your body. You'd coat yourself in olive oil, then scrape it all off. Sweat, dust, regrets, everything. It was exfoliating. It was oddly satisfying. It was also very oily. You didn't wash away dirt. You smeared it into a temporary art piece and peeled it off like a human lasagna sheet. Now, onto perfume. Romans loved it. Men, women, even children wore scent. Perfume was the great equalizer between the classes, except it wasn't. Because high-quality perfume was made from exotic ingredients like myrrh, cinnamon, saffron, rose oil, and imported resins. These were stored in delicate glass bottles you were absolutely not allowed to drop, because one vial could cost more than your monthly bread allowance. Cheaper perfumes? Less delightful. These were concoctions of vinegar, herbs, and anything else that kind of masked the smell of sweaty wool. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they created new smells. The kind that made people take a step back and politely ask if you'd recently been embalmed. And yes, Romans layered smells. If you couldn't remove the bad scent, you buried it under stronger ones. Olive oil mixed with lavender, or a paste of crushed mint and vinegar, or smoke from incense wafted through your cloak. Public bathhouses even had perfumed steam rooms, where you could sweat out yesterday's stew and come out smelling like overcooked roses. Speaking of bathhouses, they were the closest thing Romans had to a full-body cleanse. You'd go in, strip down, coat yourself in oil, get scraped, steam-baked, dunked in hot water, dunked again in cold water, and finally exit the building with clean skin and a fine coating of borrowed fragrance from whoever sat next to you. It was a communal affair. If someone had garlic for lunch, so did your paws. Of course, not everyone could afford a trip to the baths every day. So for most citizens, especially the working poor, personal hygiene was a rotation of dusting off, splashing water on the face and praying no one leaned in too close. They might burn incense in their home or dab their tunic with whatever scent they could afford. But for the most part, people just accepted that everyone kind of smelled like a combination of hard labor, damp wool, and optimism. Hair was perfumed too. Oils infused with rose petals, cloves, or cinnamon would be rubbed into the scalp, not just for scent, but for scalp health. If you were a woman of status, your hairdresser might even scent your braids before pinning them into a towering sculpture of social pressure. And clothing? You guessed it. Perfumed sachets were tucked into folds, under belts, or even stitched into the hems of cloaks. The idea was simple: distract the nose. If your tunic smells like dried lavender, maybe no one notices that your feet smell like the inside of a public latrine. Now, let's talk about animals. Goats, to be specific. Goats were everywhere, and they stank. Their scent clung to markets, streets, and by unfortunate proximity people. If you owned goats, your skin eventually developed goat notes. You could perfume yourself all day, but under it all was still a faint undertone of hooves and melancholy. And yet, Romans adapted. They made scent a cultural art form. The rich turned their homes into aromatic palaces with incense braziers, scented oils, and even perfume fountains. Because when you're that rich, you just pour money into the air. The poor found creative ways to freshen up: citrus peels tucked into belts, herbal bundles in satchels, chewing parsley to cleanse the breath. So yes, Romans stank, but they stank with style. Next up, let's look at what Romans wore to bed, if anything. Hint: it's breezy. Very breezy. You're a patrician. You own 6 tunics, 3 togas, and a tunic made from purple-dyed silk, which cost more than your neighbor's house. People look at you with awe, or with resentment, sometimes both. In ancient Rome, if you were rich, really rich, your clothing didn't whisper wealth. It shouted it from the rooftops, with gold-threaded embroidery and a procession of slaves to carry your cloak when it dragged on the floor. You didn't just dress to impress, you dressed to assert dominance, blind the commoners, and make senators second-guess their investments. Let's start with your tunics. The average Roman had 1, maybe 2. You have a wardrobe. Not a wooden wardrobe, those are for storing things. You have an entourage of fabrics: lightweight linen for summer lounging, soft wool for public appearances, maybe even imported Egyptian cotton, because why not offend the gods with luxury? And then, of course, there's your silk tunic, purple-dyed, possibly interwoven with gold thread, possibly lined with something so rare and extinct, it should come with an apology letter to nature. This isn't a tunic, this is an event. This tunic enters the room before you do. It glows, it swishes. It makes every plebeian in the forum stare and reconsider their life decisions. The color purple, specifically Tyrian purple, was extracted from sea snails by an extremely smelly, labor-intensive process. Thousands of snails gave their lives just so you could look like royalty. The dye was so expensive and so exclusive that laws, sumptuary laws, were made to limit its use. Naturally, you ignored those laws, because you are the law. Or at least, you're close enough to it to wear forbidden colors and get away with a dramatic hair flip. Now let's talk togas, the true symbol of Roman wealth and political ambition. You own 3, which is 2 more than anyone really wants. Because wearing a toga is like trying to drape yourself in a bedsheet soaked in dignity and regret. It takes skill, assistance, and patience. You don't put on a toga, you are assembled into one. The toga itself is massive 17 feet of fabric, minimum. It wraps, folds, drapes, and bunches in ways that defy physics and good sense. One misstep, and it sags off your shoulder like you've given up on life. 2 missteps, and it gets caught in your sandals, and suddenly you're doing an interpretive dance in front of the Senate. But when it's done right, chef's kiss. You look powerful, statuesque, like someone who's never done manual labor but has a strong opinion about aqueducts. Your toga isn't just white. Oh no, it might have a purple stripe, latus clavus. if you're a senator, or a full purple border if you're of consular rank. It might shimmer with subtle embroidery, nothing too flashy, of course, just enough to let everyone know your family has dinnerware older than most gods. Then come the accessories. Brooches made of gold and ivory, rings on nearly every finger, including your pinky, because it needs love too. A thick gold necklace with a cameo of your own face, because self-esteem is important. You don't carry coins, you carry people who carry your coins. And shoes? Custom leather sandals dyed red, because only the elite get to look like their feet are bleeding from luxury. The straps are perfectly wrapped, never scuffed, and often fastened by a servant whose entire job is shoe management. You haven't touched your own ankles in years. Even your cloak, the pallium or lucerna, is lined with fur in winter and perfumed with imported spices from lands you've never even heard of. It's pinned in place with a gem-studded clasp so large it could double as a dinner plate. The cloak doesn't just keep you warm, it keeps others aware of your tax bracket. Let's not forget grooming. You visit the best tonsor in town, get olive oil scalp massages, and your beard, if you have one, is trimmed with the precision of a military campaign. Your scent? A blend of frankincense, myrrh, and I own 5 villas and a private bath slave. You don't sweat, you glisten. And if you do sweat, it's delicately dabbed away with a silk handkerchief that costs more than a merchant's cart. Your appearance is curated, controlled, calculated. Every fold, every fragrance, every accessory is part of the unspoken announcement. I have arrived, and I brought my wealth with me. Of course, not everyone loves this. The poor resent you. The newly rich copy you. The senators pretend not to notice you upstaging them at the Saturnalia banquet. But deep down, everyone knows you've won the Roman fashion game. At least until someone invents an even shinier necklace. Now that you've strutted through the marble halls in high-end finery, let's come back to Earth specifically, to bed. And spoiler, pajamas were not a thing. Armor looks cool, but it pinches, it's hot, and it makes sitting down nearly impossible. Chainmail? That's just metal spaghetti slowly trying to strangle your shoulders. You're protected but uncomfortable. Welcome to the Roman military experience, where your outfit might save your life, but it's also trying to ruin your day one blister at a time. From sweaty padding to awkward bathroom breaks, ancient armor is less heroic battle attire and more personal sauna wrapped in regret. Let's begin with lorica segmentata, the iconic segmented Roman armor made of overlapping iron plates. It covers your chest, shoulders, and upper arms like a sheet metal embrace. And it does look impressive. It gleams in the sunlight, clinks as you march, and makes you look vaguely like an angry turtle. Unfortunately, it also weighs around 9 kilos, 20 pounds. And putting it on is like solving a puzzle where the reward is shoulder pain and restricted breathing. The pieces are connected by leather straps and buckles, most of which will break at the least convenient moment like mid-battle or while sneezing. You can't get it on alone. You need a buddy, preferably one with patience and strong thumbs, because the buckles are stiff and the leather shrinks when wet, which it always is, thanks to either sweat or rain or both. You do not slip into armor. You negotiate with it. Beneath the iron shell you wear a padded undergarment called a subarmalis, which exists to keep the metal from shredding your skin, theoretically. In practice, it's like wrapping yourself in a sweaty quilt and then bolting a filing cabinet to your chest. It absorbs heat. It traps moisture. After an hour of marching in summer, it smells like a haunted locker room. Chainmail, lorica hamata, isn't much better. Made of thousands of tiny interlocking iron rings, it distributes weight evenly, which is nice. But that weight is still 10, 15 kilos, and it moves as you move, shifting, rubbing, settling into your shoulder blades like an iron house guest who overstays their welcome. It's also noisy. You jingle with every step like a one-man percussion band. Stealth is not an option. And let's talk about chafing. No one warns you that wearing armor turns your body into a rubbing post. Your neck? Raw. Your armpits? Irritated. Your thighs? Betrayed. Even with extra padding, the motion of marching, twisting, crouching, or breathing causes friction. After a few days, you walk like someone who made poor decisions with a horse saddle. Helmets, or galea, are another story. Made of bronze or iron, they protect your head while simultaneously trying to cook it. Some have cheek guards, some have nose guards, some just have very sharp edges in unfortunate places. They pinch your ears, mess up your hair, and, when it rains, turn into echo chambers that amplify the sound of your own misery. Many helmets include a plume or crest, sometimes for decoration, sometimes for unit identification, sometimes just to let your enemies know who to aim for. It's like putting a "kick me" sign on your scalp, but with feathers. Leg protection? Occasionally. Some soldiers wore greaves, metal shin guards, but only on one leg, usually the left, which was exposed when holding the shield. This means you're half protected and entirely lopsided. And yes, they also chafe. Now imagine doing everything in this. Armor. Marching, climbing, fighting, eating, going to the bathroom. Sitting down in full armor is possible, but undignified. You sort of squat, shift, and hope nothing pinches too hard. Lying down? Only if you're fine sleeping in a metal cocoon that smells like foot sweat and regret. And once you've survived the day in your portable oven, you have to take it all off. Slowly, carefully. If you're lucky, your skin isn't torn. If you're really lucky, the leather straps haven't fused to your tunic with sweat. But even when you're finally free, your muscles ache from carrying all that protection. Your shoulders throb. Your lower back files a complaint. And your armpits. Let's not talk about your armpits. Despite all this, Roman soldiers preferred armor. It worked. It saved lives. It deflected blades, reduced bruises, and made enemies think twice. But every soldier secretly dreamed of one thing: being off duty, back in civilian tunics, and able to scratch their own back without risk of tetanus. So, the next time you see a statue of a Roman soldier standing tall in pristine armor, remember, that guy itches. That guy hasn't sat comfortably in a week. That guy smells like boiled wool and ambition. Coming up next, let's strip away the armor and ask the important question: what did Romans wear to bed? Spoiler alert, not much. You own one cloak. It's your coat, your blanket, your towel, your pillow, and your raincoat. It smells like a wet sheep. You love it anyway. In Rome, your cloak isn't just an accessory, it's a lifestyle. This single, glorified rectangle of wool follows you everywhere, from the streets of the Forum to the filth of the latrine. It wraps you up like a warm burrito of questionable hygiene and social status, and it's doing the work of about 6 modern garments at once. Let's get familiar. The general term for a Roman cloak is pallium, though depending on your status, region, or level of drama, you might wear a lacerna, a sagum, or a paenula. These all have slight differences in cut and intention, but they share one thing in common. They're made of wool, and they will never stop smelling vaguely like anxiety and mildew. The pallium is what you'd call the Roman everyday cloak. A rectangular piece of cloth you drape over your tunic for warmth, modesty, and general flair. It doesn't have sleeves, buttons, or a zipper. If it stays on your shoulders, it's thanks to strategic pinning and the power of hope. If it falls off, and it will, it becomes a tripping hazard, a blanket, or an impromptu picnic mat, depending on your mood and the nearest patch of dirt. Then there's the sagum, the military cloak, thicker, heavier, and designed to withstand cold, rain, and long passive-aggressive marches. This is the cloak of choice for soldiers, adventurers, and anyone planning to sleep outdoors while listening to a barbarian horde in the distance. It's pinned at one shoulder, leaving your sword arm free, and your torso only slightly soggy in a downpour. The paenula is the Roman version of a poncho, semicircular, hooded, and great for rain until the wind blows it directly into your face. It's popular with travelers and people who don't mind looking like an especially stylish tent. If you owned one of these, congratulations. You've invested in the ancient equivalent of waterproof outerwear, assuming you don't mind the word waterproof being used loosely. And let's not forget the lacerna, the cloak of the elite. Lighter, often dyed, sometimes lined with fur, It was worn over your toga or tunic during banquets and other important moments where you needed to make an entrance without catching a chill. Wearing a lacerna says, "I'm cold, but expensive about it." Now, while these cloaks look impressive in sculptures, in reality they're stubborn, itchy, and almost always damp. Wool repels water to an extent, but not forever. After a few hours in Roman weather, whether it's fog, mist, or just dense peasant sweat, your cloak becomes a soggy fleece that clings to your back like a disappointed pet. And you never wash it. Washing wool ruins it. And also, who has time for that? You beat it against a rock occasionally, air it out over a balcony, maybe brush off the bigger chunks of yesterday's stew, and call it clean. It permanently smells like everything you've done in it. Walked through a fish market, napped in a barn, cried during a tax audit. Yet despite all this, your cloak is your most prized possession. Why? Because it's everything. It keeps you warm at night. It hides embarrassing stains. It serves as a picnic blanket, a bedroll, a privacy screen, a towel, and in desperate moments, a makeshift sack for hauling vegetables. If you lose it, you might as well go home assuming you have one. Even the Romans knew how vital these cloaks were. Runaway slave notices often included the color and shape of the missing cloak. Soldiers guarded theirs with their lives. And writers like Seneca waxed poetic about the cloak's ability to represent one's philosophy. Simple, humble, effective. It was an outfit and a statement in one it just happened to be itchy and probably full of lice. Color mattered too. The poor wore undyed natural wool, beige, grey, or the color of dirty oatmeal. The wealthy? They had dyed cloaks. Red was popular with soldiers, purple for the elite, blue or green for the fashion-forward or slightly theatrical. But dye fades fast in the Roman sun, so most cloaks ended up looking like tired watercolor paintings after a few weeks of wear. Pins and brooches held cloaks together, often fancy ones for the rich, and humble wooden or bronze clasps for everyone else. If you didn't pin it right, it either choked you slowly or slipped off mid-speech, turning your public oration into an accidental toga-free strip show. So yes, there was an art to it. In the end, Roman cloaks weren't glamorous. They were practical, multi-purpose, and necessary for survival in a world without central heating or proper personal space. They were burdensome and beloved, and like most things Roman, they worked just barely. Next up, after all that cloak, wearing you're exhausted. So, what exactly did Romans sleep in? Time to get under the non-existent covers. Only the emperor can wear purple. Deep, rich Tyrian purple. If anyone else tries, it's treason. So, if you're thinking of looking fabulous, don't. Fashion crime equals actual crime. In ancient Rome, your clothing wasn't just a style statement, it was a legal document. And if your hem was a little too purple, your tunic a bit too regal, you could find yourself hauled off by the Praetorian Guard faster than you could say, it was on clearance. Because when it came to fashion, the emperor didn't play. Tyrian purple wasn't just a colour, it was a warning sign. Made from the crushed guts of thousands of Murex sea snails, the dye took so long to make and cost so much that it became a status symbol so exclusive. The state literally claimed ownership over it. Only the emperor, and the emperor alone, could wear a fully purple toga, known as the toga picta. And if you were caught cosplaying as royalty, that wasn't just a faux pas. That was treason, punishable by exile, confiscation of property, or sudden and dramatic death. So what did the emperor actually wear? A lot. But let's start with the basics. The toga picta was the imperial equivalent of a red carpet look. It was deep, saturated purple, embroidered with gold thread, often featuring elaborate patterns, mythological scenes, or the occasional reminder that you are beneath me, peasant. It shimmered. It glowed. It probably weighed as much as a medium-sized goat. And it required several slaves to fold and maintain it, because 17 feet of silk and wool drama doesn't fold itself. Then there was the tunica palmata, a ceremonial tunic worn under the toga picta, often with vertical palm leaf designs embroidered in gold. The layering was intentional. The emperor was meant to appear larger than life, swaddled in divine symbolism, and roughly 20 pounds of prestige. Footwear? Think red leather boots, often dyed specially and reserved only for the highest office. They were soft, polished, and worn only on public occasions. The rest of the time, the emperor might lounge barefoot in his palace garden, getting grapes hand-fed to him by someone who'd memorized the Iliad. And of course, no imperial outfit was complete without accessories. The emperor might wear a diadem, a kind of jeweled headband, if he was leaning more toward Eastern styles, or a laurel wreath, if he was going for the "I just conquered Gaul and now I want lunch" vibe. His rings were massive, heavy, and usually engraved with seals that could command armies or bankrupt cities with a single wax press. But behind the sparkle and silk was a deep undercurrent of paranoia. Because in Rome, the brighter you shone, the bigger your target. Emperors knew that clothes weren't just fashion, they were power, and power made people nervous. The line between beloved ruler and stabbed in the Senate was one unfortunate outfit away, which is why strict sumptuary laws kept everyone else in line. You could wear purple accents if you were of high enough rank, a stripe here, a border there, but a full purple cloak? Absolutely not. Even generals during triumphs had to borrow imperial garments and return them the moment the parade was over. Keep the horse, return the tunic. In fact, so sacred was the imperial wardrobe that many emperors had special vestiarii, personal staff, whose sole job was managing and guarding the clothing. These people knew which stitch went where, how to fold the toga picta so the embroidery showed just the right amount of hubris, and when to replace the gold thread so the emperor wouldn't look poor. And the laundering? An event in itself. Imperial garments were washed carefully by trusted fullers using only the finest urine. Yes, even the emperor's robes got the ammonia treatment. That's Roman democracy for you. No matter how powerful you were, your laundry still smelled like public latrines. Now, let's talk imposters. Every few decades, some brave, read delusional, soul would try to pass themselves off as emperor by wearing a purple cloak and marching into town with a few bored soldiers. This usually ended poorly. Fashion crimes in Rome weren't just laughed at, they were executed. You don't mess with the emperor's shade palette. Still, the allure was powerful. Purple wasn't just rare, it was sacred. It represented divinity, dominion, and decadence. Wearing it was the closest thing to becoming a god on earth. Or at least, the Roman version of one. Glittery, terrifying, and deeply stressed out about provincial rebellions. So next time you see a Roman emperor on a mosaic or statue swathed in purple, dripping in gold, standing like he owns the planet, remember, he probably can't bend his knees, he's slightly itchy, and he's watching everyone around him with deep suspicion. Next up, let's descend from the palatial heights and return to the bedroom where Roman sleepwear, or lack thereof, awaits us. Spoiler, it's going to be drafty. The Roman bathhouse is where you strut your stuff. Completely nude except for sandals and maybe a sponge on a stick. Modesty? Not in this steamy social hotspot. Welcome to the ultimate Roman catwalk, where the outfit of choice is no outfit at all, and the only thing separating you from a 1,000-year-old soap opera is a little steam and a lot of body confidence. The Thermae isn't just where you go to get clean. It's where you go to be seen in all your oily, slightly sunburnt glory. Let's begin with the dress code. Nude. Fully. Gloriously. Unapologetically. You walk in, disrobe, and instantly join the parade of every body type imaginable, from shredded gladiators to senators, with the physique of a dropped amphora. Everyone's exposed, and that's the point. No one can hide behind fabric, armor, or wealth. You are all just slippery pink mortals, wandering around like overcooked sausages. But there are accessories. Oh yes. First, the sandals. Always wear sandals. The floors of the bathhouse are warm, damp, and often harbor mysterious smears from the previous guest. These are not places for bare feet, unless you want an unplanned encounter with foot rot, toe fungus, or someone's forgotten lunch. Roman sandals are made of leather and strapped with flair, some fancier than others, but their primary purpose here is defensive. Next, the strigil. This curved metal scraper is the ancient version of a loofah and your most loyal bathhouse companion. After covering yourself in olive oil, you use the strigil to scrape off the oil, along with the grime, dead skin, and any last shreds of dignity. If you're rich, a slave does this for you while you talk politics or judge the body hair of the man next to you. If you're not, you do it yourself, less glamorous, but more affordable. Now for the sponge on a stick, or tessorium. This charming invention is not for scrubbing your back, it's for bathroom use. Yes, that bathroom use. Usually found in public latrines, some people brought their own for bathhouse convenience. It's the Swiss Army knife of personal hygiene, stored in a little bucket of vinegar when not in use. So, if you see someone clutching one, give them space. And maybe don't borrow it. Bathhouses were also about showing off what you weren't wearing. Jewelry was rare, but a discreet gold ring or bracelet might stay on, especially if it screamed, "Wealthy citizen, do not rob." Hair would be styled just so, oiled and combed into shape. Your scent? Courtesy of yesterday's dab of rose oil or lavender infusion, and for those particularly, extra citizens, a subtle body glitter of ground mica might be applied. Yes, ancient body shimmer. The Romans were doing the spa influencer look before it was cool. Inside the bathhouse, you followed a ritual. First, the appetiterium, the changing room, where slaves watched your belongings unless they didn't, and you got robbed. Then the tepidarium, a warm room to ease into the vibe. Then the coldarium, the hot, steamy room where you sweat like a rotisserie chicken and question every life decision. Finally, the frigidarium, the cold plunge where your pores snap shut and your dignity floats away. It was loud, social, and steamy. Conversations echoed. Deals were struck. Gossip flew faster than sandals off a sprinting senator. And yes, nudity was mandatory. If you tried to wear a tunic or wrap yourself up in a modest towel, people assumed you were either sick, hiding a rash, or plotting a crime. And gender? Segregated, usually. Some bathhouses had different hours for men and women. Others had separate facilities. But in rare cases where the rules blurred, things got complicated. Let's just say Roman authors loved writing scandalous stories about mixed bathing and who dropped the sponge where. For elite citizens, the bathhouse visit was a 3-hour event. You bathed, you chatted. You exercised in the palestra nude wrestling anyone, then soaked again. Afterward, you reclined in the lounge, snacked on olives, and maybe had your armpits plucked by an unfortunate servant. Poorer citizens also used the baths, often subsidized by the state, which understood that a clean-ish public is a happy public. These bathhouses were louder, smellier, and had fewer frills, but the ritual was the same. Strip, soak, scrape, shiver, snack. And if you think all this sounds a bit awkward, consider this. To the Romans, bathing nude with strangers wasn't weird, it was civilized. It was a daily ritual of bodily reset and social theatre. Modesty was for barbarians and people with something to hide. So there you are, naked, gleaming with oil, armed with a strigil and a questionable sponge, and for once, your cloak isn't trying to choke you. Next, let's leave the bathhouse and enter the bedroom. It's time to answer the most vulnerable Roman question of all. What did they sleep in, if anything? At funerals, you wear plain white, or black if you're late Roman Empire. Either way, it's scratchy, solemn, and probably reused from your cousin's wedding. In ancient Rome, even mourning came with a dress code, and yes, it was about as comfortable as you'd expect. Funerals weren't just somber affairs of grief and memory. They were opportunities to display tradition, social standing, and how well you could sob while wearing linen that felt like sandpaper. For most of Roman history, white was the go-to color for mourning. Not bright, cheerful white, the color of fresh tunics and hopeful brides, but dull, chalky, slightly yellowed white that said, "Yes, I'm sad, but I'm also itchy." It was the same undyed wool or linen you'd wear on other formal occasions, just styled with less flair and more existential dread. If you were a man, you wore a plain toga. No purple stripe, no embroidery, no attempt at flair. Just the basic toga pura, or toga virilis, folded over your shoulder like a heavy sigh, and weighed down with emotional baggage and possibly actual tears. It was big, bulky, and hard to manage while grieving. You'd probably trip over it once or twice during the funeral procession. That was fine, so did everyone else. Women, on the other hand, wore plain stolas and palla cloaks, often made from undyed wool and sometimes with veils to cover the head. Not because of modesty, but to hide the tears, the blotchy faces, and the dishevelled hairstyles that came from hours of wailing into one's sleeve. Bonus points if you could work in a dramatic hair tear mid-ceremony. It wasn't just acceptable, it was encouraged. Later in Roman history, around the 2nd or 3rd century AD, black started sneaking into the colour palette. Inspired by Greek customs and maybe just the realization that funerals were already depressing enough without looking like a pile of laundry, black mourning clothes became fashionable among the elite. Still scratchy, still miserable. But at least it hid the wine stains. If you were extremely close to the deceased, say, their spouse or a child, you might dress even more humbly. You might skip jewelry, wear no perfume, and even appear barefoot, just to drive the emotional point home. Some mourners even wore their clothes ripped or dishevelled to show the rawness of their grief. In this case, wrinkled tunic wasn't a fashion crime, it was a tribute. Children wore simpler versions of their usual tunics, maybe with a black sash, maybe just with extra dust on their faces because someone forgot to clean them before the ceremony. And slaves? They wore whatever they were told to wear, which usually meant old, repurposed mourning tunics that had already seen several generations of sadness. The deceased themselves were often dressed with care, especially if they were wealthy. A nice toga, perhaps a fine tunic underneath, jewelry if they were vain, or if their family wanted to make a statement, and shoes, even though everyone knew they wouldn't be walking anywhere. Their mouth might be filled with a coin to pay charon, the ferryman of the underworld, a tradition that said, "We loved you, and we didn't want you stuck haunting the kitchen." During the procession, professional mourners might join the crowd, usually women paid to cry very loudly, tear at their hair, and generally upstage the actual family. They were the ancient Roman equivalent of performance grief. Part tradition, part theatre, part psychological warfare. Their outfits? Simple and dramatic, usually black veils and draping cloth, perfect for flailing and fainting, and if you were part of the funeral guild, the Collegia Funeratica, you probably wore a uniform tunic and a slightly bored expression. You'd helped bury dozens of people this week already, and this guy wasn't even famous. You were just here for the procession snacks and the chance to walk behind the band. After the burial or cremation, mourning continued but with a time limit. Most mourning periods lasted 9 days, called the novendialis, during which the family wore subdued clothing, refrained from parties, and tried not to smell too strong. After that, the living were expected to return to the business of surviving Roman life, which often included more funerals. There were, of course, exceptions. If a major public figure died, the entire city might go into mourning, with citizens wearing dark cloaks, businesses closing, and statues dressed up in black veils like very somber mannequins. It was grief on a civic scale, complete with pomp, ceremony, and possibly gladiator games if the deceased had enough coin. But for everyday Romans, funeral attire was a balancing act, respectful but affordable, formal but uncomfortable, dramatic but not so dramatic that your uncle accused you of stealing the spotlight. You mourned, you scratched, you stumbled through a eulogy, and then you went home to reuse the tunic for someone else's wedding. Because in Rome, life was short, funerals were frequent, and outfits had to do double duty. Next up, let's slip out of the sad clothes and talk about Roman pajamas, or the complete lack thereof. You're going to bed, but the draft is coming with you. Rome had sumptuary rules about who could wear what. If you're a baker, don't dress like a senator. If you're a senator, don't dress like the emperor. If you're the emperor, well, good luck. Because in ancient Rome, fashion wasn't just about fabrics and flattering silhouettes, it was a system of control, a visible hierarchy stitched directly into your wardrobe. And if you wore something you weren't supposed to, that wasn't just a bold fashion choice. That was a punishable offense. Let's start with the basics. Sumptuary laws were Rome's attempt to keep people in their lanes socially, economically, and sartorially. The idea was that your clothing should reflect your place in the grand Roman machine. Not too rich, not too flashy, not too close to pretending you had more status than you actually did. If your tunic whispered wealthy merchant, when you were, in fact, a humble cobbler, someone might report you. And that someone would probably be your jealous neighbor who definitely couldn't afford purple trim either. Speaking of purple, let's talk about Tyrian purple, the color of status, power, and snail murder. Only the emperor could wear a fully purple toga. Senators and higher-ranking officials might get a purple stripe, or clavus, on their tunics, depending on their rank. These stripes were basically Roman name tags, except, instead of, "Hi, my name is Marcus," it read, "Hi, I can have you fined for stepping on my foot." If you were caught wearing more purple than allowed, you weren't just committing a faux pas, you were violating imperial law. You could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed for impersonating a higher class. Because in Rome, fashion fraud was treason adjacent. Imagine getting decapitated because your cloak was just too vibrant. And it wasn't just colors. Materials were regulated too. Silk was considered scandalous for centuries, not just because it was expensive, but because it was sheer. Roman senators got very grumpy when men or women wore diaphanous tunics that left little to the imagination. One senator famously complained that the only thing separating him from the person in front of him was a whisper of decency and a strong breeze. The law eventually allowed silk, but only for the upper crust. Even then, excessive silk wearing could spark public outrage. "This man has 12 silk tunics," someone might shout in the forum. "While I can barely afford a goat." Cue mob, cue torches, cue fashion-based uprising. Footwear also got the Roman regulatory treatment. Only senators could wear red shoes, calci mullae, and even then, only on official business. Wearing red shoes while buying olives? Bold. Illegal. Questionable. The average citizen wore plain sandals or boots, functional, affordable, and deeply unfashionable. Women weren't exempt from sumptuary rules either. Jewelry, hair accessories, and even the amount of gold you could wear were all limited by law. Not that this stopped anyone. Wealthy Roman women became very good at wearing legally acceptable amounts of jewelry, in increasingly large and absurd formats. One ring officer. It just happens to cover 3 fingers and have a built-in sundial. And of course, there were loopholes. The rich always find them. Some dyed their togas with almost purple hues, deep blues, or reds that skirted the legal edge. Others had their slaves wear fashionable accessories on their behalf. "No, this sapphire brooch isn't mine, it's my slave's." "Yes, the one who carries my groceries." Then there were the funerals, the one time when everyone, regardless of class, could dress fancy without too many questions. Want to wear a nicer tunic? Just say you're in mourning. Want to look rich for a day? Borrow a relative's funeral garb, and hope no one asks who died. The laws weren't always enforced consistently. If you were powerful, rich, or just knew the right magistrate, you could get away with a lot. But if you were a merchant who got a little too sparkly, or a freedman whose shoes were suspiciously polished, you might be fined, harassed, or socially shunned for climbing the fashion ladder too quickly. All of this sounds extreme until you realize Rome was obsessed with order. The empire ran on hierarchy. People needed to know who was who, instantly, based on how itchy their clothes looked. Your outfit was your ID badge, your tax bracket, your family tree, and your resume all draped over your shoulder with the elegance of a toddler playing dress-up. So yes, fashion crimes were real, and they mattered. Because in a society where upward mobility was rare and social envy was rampant, dressing above your station was more than rude, it was revolutionary. Coming up next, You've tiptoed through the fashion minefield of Rome. Now it's time to wind down and go to sleep. But what exactly did Romans wear to bed? Pajamas weren't a thing, so prepare for chilly ankles and a whole lot of awkward draft. It's 38 degrees Celsius. You're still in wool. It's snowing. Still in wool. Fashion doesn't adapt to seasons. You adapt by sweating or freezing and pretending you're fine. Welcome to Roman fashion, where the weather forecast means absolutely nothing and seasonal collections are just a fever dream. The concept of dressing for the climate hadn't really caught on yet, mostly because clothing options were limited, expensive, and largely designed by people who didn't have to walk anywhere. You didn't get summer wear. You got wear. And it was made of wool. Let's start with summer. Imagine standing in the midday sun, surrounded by stone walls that radiate heat like oven doors, while wearing a tunic made from woven regret. The wool itches. It clings. It absorbs sweat like a sponge and releases it with the determination of a Roman curse. There is no breathability, no moisture wicking. You are the moisture. You are the wick. If you're lucky, your tunic is made of linen slightly lighter, slightly less itchy, and marginally more breathable. Unfortunately, linen was more expensive and harder to find. Most Romans made do with coarser fabrics that turned into personal saunas by noon. A good breeze through the forum might feel like salvation unless it lifts your tunic in the process, exposing parts of you that definitely weren't ready for sunlight. And don't even think about sandals helping much. There are no socks, just your sweaty feet sliding around on thin leather soles, rubbing your heels raw and turning cobblestones into personal foot massage torture devices. Want to remove your shoes for relief? Too bad. The streets are filthy. A step in the wrong puddle, and you're wearing someone else's bathwater for the rest of the day. Now let's leap into winter. You're still in a tunic, only now it's damp, stiff, and vaguely mold-scented. Rome might not get snow often, but it gets cold. Cold enough for your breath to fog and your joints to start filing complaints. Your solution? Layers. As in, pile on another tunic. Maybe wrap a wool cloak around your shoulders and hope it holds in some heat. And this is where things get really tragic. Roman cloaks were often the only outerwear people had. No scarves, no thermal underwear, no fluffy socks. Just the same wool cloak you slept in, now doubled as your armor against wind and frost. If it rained, and it did a lot, you'd pull the cloak over your head and pretend it was a roof. It wasn't. It was just soggy wool, now colder and heavier than before. Some Romans, especially soldiers and travelers, wore a paenula, a sort of hooded cape designed to repel rain. It worked about as well as wrapping yourself in a wet carpet. Once the water soaked through, the whole garment drooped like a defeated ghost, clinging to your body and whispering, "You made poor choices." There was no such thing as a winter coat, just thicker versions of summer misery. Even the rich, who could afford imported fabrics and extra layers, didn't fare much better. Silk doesn't help in a frost, and gold thread has a tragically low insulation rating. And speaking of wealth, yes, the elite did sometimes wear seasonal accessories. Lighter colors in summer, darker in winter. But this was more about looking fashionable than surviving. The rest of the population, farmers, tradesmen, slaves, simply layered what they had and hoped they didn't die of exposure while still wearing the same tunic they'd worn to last spring's tax audit. Children? Forget about it. Roman kids ran around in mini tunics and no shoes. In the summer, they sizzled like street kebabs. In the winter, they became tiny, shivering statues with runny noses and permanently chapped knees. Their idea of seasonal adjustment was standing closer to the fire if they had one. And fashion? It stayed exactly the same. No one rolled out a spring line of lighter fabrics or introduced autumn tones in tunic design. Colors faded with time and washing. If your tunic was brown, it was probably white once. If it was yellow, someone spilled wine on it. Function always came before form. And warmth? That was optional. The closest thing to seasonal adaptation was shaving. Some people grew beards in winter not for style, but because face wool helped against windburn. Others simply didn't bathe as often. because the water was cold and the hypercaust wasn't cooperating. That's right, seasonal fashion in Rome might mean a layer of dirt. So no, Rome didn't invent winter fashion, or summer fashion, or anything resembling climate-conscious clothing. They invented roads, aqueducts, and concrete, but not gloves. Never gloves. Coming up next. Speaking of sleep-deprived, sweaty citizens, what exactly did Romans wear to bed? Or, more accurately, what didn't they wear? Rich Roman women painted their faces with white lead, wore fake hair from slaves, and penciled eyebrows with soot. Beauty is pain, or at least mild poisoning. In ancient Rome, vanity wasn't just tolerated, it was practically a national sport. If you were a woman of status, your face was a canvas, and your body a billboard advertising wealth, youth, and a very flexible relationship with lead-based compounds. Because in the empire, beauty meant effort and discomfort, and occasionally, hallucinations. Let's start with the face. The goal was pale, smooth, and completely unnatural. Romans associated pale skin with nobility, because if you had color in your cheeks, it meant you probably worked outside or were alive enough to sweat. So wealthy women layered on a base made of cerussa, a luxurious word for white lead paste. Yes, lead, the same stuff that made pipes dangerous and brains foggy. But it gave that matte, death-adjacent finish everyone was after. Think elegant ghost. Of course, applying this lead paste wasn't subtle. It had to be slathered on evenly, which was hard to do when your mirror was a polished metal disc and your lighting came from a flickering oil lamp. The results were often interpretive. Add in the Roman humidity, and by midday your carefully painted face might resemble a melting fresco. But that was part of the charm. Cheeks were given a pop of color with red ochre or vermilion, sometimes mixed with animal fat or beeswax. The redder the better. Lips, too, received similar treatment applied with a fingertip or a crude brush. If you accidentally used too much and looked like a startled fish, that was fine. Roman beauty wasn't about subtlety. It was about being visibly, almost aggressively put together. Now, the eyes. Roman eyeliner wasn't some sleek, waterproof pen. It was a gritty mix of soot, charcoal, or even powdered antimony, applied with a tiny stick or the edge of a knife. It gave you those smoky, mysterious eyes, and the constant risk of corneal damage. Eyelids could also be painted blue or green using crushed malachite or lapis lazuli, which sounds fancy until you realize these were basically ground-up rocks smeared into your face. Eyebrows? Critical. Thin, arched, and ideally touching in the middle. That's right, the unibrow was in. If you weren't blessed with one naturally, no problem. You could draw it in using soot, or a bit of goat hair dipped in ink, or glue some extra eyebrow on using real hair from slaves or pets. Your face was your own personal craft project. Speaking of hair, Roman women were obsessed with it. Long, thick, and elaborately styled hair was the ultimate status symbol, which created a problem, since not everyone had naturally luscious locks. Enter wigs and hairpieces. Wigs were made from the hair of conquered peoples. Blonde hair came from Gauls and Germans. Dark, glossy locks from the east. So every time a Roman woman swished her magnificent hair, there was a decent chance it had once belonged to someone now enslaved or beheaded. Beauty routines were rarely ethical. Hairstyling was a full-time job. Rich women had ornatrices, personal hairdressers, who twisted, curled, pinned, and piled hair into architectural marvels that made gravity look negotiable. Some styles were so elaborate they required scaffolding, and heaven help you if it rained. One unexpected drizzle, and your towering coiffure became a soggy topiary. To hold everything in place, beeswax, a lot of it. Hair was coated, molded, and occasionally lacquered into place. Smelled weird, looked great, at least until it melted under the Mediterranean sun and left a waxy trail down your back like a candle gone rogue. Perfume also played a huge role. Roman women doused themselves in scented oils, rose, myrrh, cinnamon, and sometimes muskier things found in nature. Not always pleasant, but at least it covered the scent of boiling lead paste and goat hair eyebrows. The entire routine could take hours. A woman's morning wasn't brush and go. It was a military-grade operation involving jars, brushes, powders, hot irons, slaves, and blind optimism. And once you were fully made up, you still had to be careful not to laugh too hard or sweat too much, or your entire face might slide south before dinner. Critics of the time were harsh. Male writers like Juvenal mocked women for being vain, artificial, or smelly from too much perfume. Of course, none of these men were expected to look attractive while being slowly poisoned by their foundation. Easy to critique when your own morning routine involves throwing on a tunic and yelling at someone, but women persisted. Because even in ancient Rome, beauty meant power, it meant admiration, and sometimes it just meant fitting in at the banquet table without someone whispering, "She's looking a little too alive this season." Coming up next, now that your face is perfectly painted and your hair is built to withstand siege warfare, what happens when you go to bed? Spoiler, there's no makeup remover, only regret and olive oil. Slipping on your toga and flashing a senator mid-conversation? It happens. Getting your cloak caught on a chariot axle? Also common. Fashion was hazardous. In ancient Rome, style wasn't just uncomfortable, it was actively dangerous. Think about it. Heavy wool garments, 17-foot fabric puzzles, sandals with all the grip of a fish, and no safety pins. You weren't just getting dressed, you were entering a combat scenario with yourself. Let's begin with the toga, the crown jewel of Roman fashion, the symbol of citizenship, the ultimate expression of Roman dignity, and also a giant woolen death trap. The toga wasn't sewn, buttoned, or clasped. It was wrapped, which sounds graceful until you're actually trying to do it, half asleep, with yesterday's olive oil still on your hands. Getting it right meant several rounds of folding, twisting, draping, and strategic shoulder tucking. Get it wrong, and the whole thing unraveled like a runaway curtain. And because there were no undergarments for most Roman men, any wardrobe malfunction could become revealing. A gust of wind, an overly enthusiastic bow, or a misstep while climbing temple stairs, and suddenly you're performing an unintended one-man show for the priesthood. Modesty, optional. Dignity, gone with the toga. Now imagine wearing one in the rain. Wool soaks up water, like a sponge made of betrayal. Your dignified toga becomes a 20-pound soggy toga monster that clings to your legs, drips down your back, and makes every step a squelching reminder that fashion is suffering. Slippery streets don't help. Marble steps become slip and slides. Many a respectable Roman ended up sprawled in the forum like an overturned tortoise. Women didn't have it easier. The stola, the traditional dress for Roman matrons, was made of multiple layers. Long, heavy, and often belted high. It was beautiful if you weren't in a hurry. Try running for a bus in one and you'd take out an entire bakery. Thankfully, there were no buses. But there were public fountains, stray dogs, and uneven cobblestones, each one a fashion hazard in disguise. Pins and brooches were another classic wardrobe menace. The fibulae, those oversized Roman safety pins, looked elegant and kept garments together. Until they didn't. One wrong move, and the thing popped open like a bear trap. Best case scenario, you lost your cloak. Worst case scenario, you stabbed yourself in the side during a political debate. Ancient scrolls don't mention it, but at least a few minor senators probably bled out over wardrobe malfunctions. Cloaks had their own unique dangers. The lacerna, paenula, or sagum, depending on your status and weather needs, were typically flung over one shoulder, secured by a pin, and left to flutter majestically behind you. In theory. In practice, cloaks got caught on door handles, wrapped around your neck during chariot rides, or flapped dramatically into nearby flames during sacrifice rituals. Picture trying to look important while your cloak is actively on fire. Let's not forget the sandals. Roman footwear came in a range of styles, from practical to performatively awful. The calci had closed toes, which were useful for protection but a nightmare in heat. Sandals were more breathable but had zero traction. Combine them with the famously filthy Roman streets, add a splash of donkey droppings, And suddenly your fashionable entrance into the baths becomes a full-body slide worthy of Olympic review. And then there's the hair. Elaborate Roman hairstyles, especially for elite women, required wax, pins, and architectural ambition. Many featured braids, coils, and towers of fake hair carefully perched atop natural locks. But one good sneeze, and the entire structure could collapse like a Jenga tower made of hair and crushed dreams. It wasn't uncommon for slaves to follow their mistresses around with emergency hairpins and a look of permanent dread. Public appearances were pressure cookers of style anxiety. If you looked too plain, people whispered that you were slipping socially. If you looked too extravagant, people whispered that you were trying too hard. And if your outfit malfunctioned mid-procession, they didn't whisper, they pointed and laughed. Loudly. And woe betide the ambitious soul who tried to mix practicality with style. Like the merchant who wore a senator's shoes. Or the baker who borrowed a too-fancy belt. One fall, one ripped hem, one unfortunate toga dip in a fish vendor's bucket, and suddenly you were fashion history's latest cautionary tale. But the best part? Romans knew all this. Satirical poets like Juvenal and Martial wrote entire poems mocking overdressed elites, clumsy senators, and try-hard fashion victims. It was entertainment. A toga accident in the middle of the forum wasn't just embarrassing, it was content. The ancient version of going viral. So, next time you wrestle with a hoodie that's inside out, or curse your jeans for having fake pockets, take comfort. At least your clothes haven't publicly betrayed you in front of the emperor. Yet, coming up, you've survived your toga turning against you. Now it's time to end the day the Roman way. But what did they actually wear or not wear to bed? Let's tiptoe into the world of ancient sleepwear, or the very loud absence of it. Thousands of years later, Roman fashion lives on in Halloween costumes, bad sandals, and the overwhelming urge to wrap a sheet around yourself and yell, "Et tu, brute!" It's true. Somewhere between the collapse of the empire and the rise of polyester, Roman style slipped into the collective cultural wardrobe and never quite left. You've seen it at costume parties, movie sets, frat houses, and confused history class reenactments. A lone figure wrapped in a bedsheet, sipping wine out of a plastic goblet, confidently declaring, "Veni, vidi, vici," before tripping over the cat. It's tradition. The toga, of course, is the star. Even though it was loathed by the people who actually had to wear it, it lives on as the symbol of all things Roman. Never mind that most Romans hated wearing togas. Never mind that they were mostly worn by male citizens on formal occasions and not during casual Tuesday trips to the market. All that matters is that, centuries later, the toga has been reborn as a party outfit. And somehow, in this rebirth, it got simplified. Because the real Roman toga, a complicated woolen burrito of a garment, 17 feet long, folded and draped with more precision than a military operation. The modern version? A bedsheet, one safety pin, a dream. Then there are the sandals. Ah, Roman sandals, functional in the ancient world, tragic in the modern one. You've probably seen them. Thin soles, too many straps, no arch support, and a tendency to squeak. Ancient Romans wore them because they were easy to make and cooler in the heat. Modern people wear them because they're authentic, and because someone convinced them gladiator chic was coming back. Spoiler, it wasn't, and it isn't. Those blister-inducing nightmares belong in a museum or a Roman reenactment where someone has committed to historical accuracy and is now regretting it. Let's not forget the influence on modern fashion shows. You know that one designer who does a Grecian-inspired collection every few years? Flowing white dresses, golden headbands, dramatic draping that requires a team of stylists and a wind machine? Yeah, that's Roman, with a side of artistic license. Designers have mined Roman fashion for years because, let's face it, the drama is irresistible. Long cloaks, bronze accents, hairstyles that defy gravity and logic. It's not practical, but it is fabulous. And in cinema, Roman fashion has a whole second life. From classic epics like Ben-Hur to more recent sword and sandal spectacles, we've built an entire genre around muscly men in short tunics, and women in gowns so tight they could pass as marble statues. Accuracy? Optional. Aesthetic? Always. Even sports got in on the action. Ever noticed how judges or professors sometimes wear robes that suspiciously resemble togas? That's not coincidence. That's legacy. The Romans were all about authority being visible. A man in a toga was a citizen. A man in a toga with a purple stripe? Powerful. A man in a toga who accidentally tripped and exposed himself? Still powerful, but with fewer friends. Then there's the language of fashion we still use. Wearing the mantle of leadership. Donning the robes of office. Stripped of his titles. These are all echoes of Roman clothing practices, reminders that what you wore wasn't just a fashion statement. It was your resume. Of course, not everything aged gracefully. The heavy use of white lead makeup? That didn't survive. The wool on bare skin situation? Also largely abandoned, except by very dedicated reenactors and people who lost a bet. But the idea that clothing reflects status, identity, and aspiration? That stuck. Hard. Today, we might not wear tunics to dinner parties or stolas to the grocery store, but the concept of dressing for the role you want? Roman to the core. They invented the power outfit long before shoulder pads and business casual. Your blazer might not be edged in purple, but it serves the same purpose, telling the world, I'm important. Please don't ask me to carry anything. And maybe that's why Roman fashion still fascinates. Not because it was comfortable, not because it was logical, but because it was theatrical. It turned everyday life into a performance. You couldn't just be a senator, you had to look like one, even if it meant sweating through 5 layers of wool and nearly passing out in the forum. So, the next time you wrestle with a stubborn zipper, try to look elegant in linen, or wrap a sheet around yourself and impersonate Caesar. Take a moment to thank the Romans. They gave us aqueducts, roads, calendars, and the eternal gift of fashion-related suffering. Next up, it's finally bedtime. But what did Romans actually wear to sleep? Or did they just not? Spoiler, your tunic's pulling night duty, and you're about to find out just how breezy sleepwear optional really is. So, tonight, as you lay there in your soft pajamas, probably made of cotton, definitely not scratchy wool, and your freshly laundered sheets that don't smell like fermented goat, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. Because Roman fashion, it wasn't glamorous, it wasn't comfortable. It was a daily exercise in enduring discomfort with as much dignity as you could muster while your tunic rode up and your sandals gave you blisters the size of olives. You survived a toga that weighed more than your dog. You endured the sting of leather underwear and the aromatic horror of communal laundry. You walked the cobblestones in shoes that offered less support than a disinterested manager. And you wore it all with the grim acceptance of someone who knows that no matter what, you're still going to bed in the same outfit tomorrow. Because it's the only outfit. And yet somehow people thrived. They built roads, wrote poetry, staged epic battles, and complained about taxes, all while wrapped in stiff linen and slowly roasting under their cloaks. Romans suffered for fashion, yes, but they also adapted, improvised, layered, and scratched. History may be itchy, smelly, and deeply impractical, but it's also human. Every badly pinned stola and urine-washed tunic is a reminder that people have always been doing their best with what they've got, even if what they've got is a leather diaper and a lice problem. So tonight, be grateful for elastic waistbands, for washing machines, for socks that come in pairs and underwear that doesn't have to be boiled in vinegar. Rest easy, modern human. You are warm. You are clean. And your cloak has never betrayed you in public. Good night.